All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Shreya Sarkar Barney. Hopefully, everyone can hear us. I'm here with our guest speaker, Andrew Wilhelms, Senior Director of Talent Management of Twilio. And welcome to all of our audience. Today, we have participants from 12 countries, Andrew. 12 countries, 4 continents. We are maxed out in capacity, so don't log out. There's a chance you may not be able to get back in. The topic of our webinar is digital leadership lessons from leading firms. We have a lot to talk about. Andrew and I did a session similar to this. We were actually paired together at a HR strategy forum session in November. We had no preparation. In fact, we had never even spoken to each other, although known each other a little bit on LinkedIn. And that session went fantastic well. In fact, it was rated the best session at HR Strategy Forum last year. So we thought we need to bring this message to the world. Many of you may have attended our webinar on digital leadership, where we shared the results of our study. So today, what Andrew and I will do is bring you some on the ground insights of what that looks like based on Andrew's experience. So we'll have snapshots of our findings, but really talk more about what does that look like with real digital leaders. So Andrew, let me start out with you. You have a fascinating background. You worked with a number of leading firms, both brick and mortar, that are very successful and have gone digital, and just some of the world's best digital firms. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I started my career in leadership development. It's been my passion from the beginning, and worked with Linkage Incorporated for a little bit, and then joined one of the clients we had at Linkage, McKesson. It's a big, giant healthcare company, Fortune 10-ish, depending on the year, and healthcare. So, and mainly distribution. So think manufacturing, or think distribution centers just around the world, moving product from where it's made to where it needs to be. And spent 9 years there in a variety of talent management roles, leadership development into the full talent management suite. And I just thought, man, feels like so much of the work that we're doing in talent management is change management, meaning taking the way we've done this for the last 30, 40 years and kind of just trying to wrench it a little bit left or wrench it a little bit right. And it felt like, man, the technology of this space of talent management, of leadership development, is falling behind what it needs to be for where companies have now gone and the way work is getting done. And I just had this thought of, it would be so fun to go to a place that was a blank slate, that was on the cutting edge of inventing the way it could and should work. And so got a call, luckily enough, from Tesla, and thought, oh dear, that sounds like an adventure worth taking. Worked with Tesla for a little bit around leadership development, set up a leadership development function. And then most recently, I have joined Twilio, which is a software company. And so now we're not even building anything material. It's all zeros and ones, or mainly zeros and ones, and a small, you would call it kind of very rapidly growing, I think, technology company with about 2,000 to 3,000 folks around the world right now. So and I've had a variety of contexts to test this thinking and to really play in this space.
Yeah, and for our audience, we will dive into the topic right now. What I want to highlight for you is every time I speak with Andrew, he has these phrases that capture like a whole book of ideas. So please make note of those phrases because I think they will take you deeper into this concept of digital leadership. Now, you were sharing with us, with me, I should, in our previous conversation, that Twilio has gone through an 88% growth in this past year.
Oh, it depends on what metric you put on it, but I would just say, yeah, growth is the name of the game in this place. Revenue, people, market, all of it. It's just the place is on fire and it's growing so rapidly.
Amazing. And you were going through that at Tesla as well.
Same. I think when I joined Tesla, we had about 40,000 people. 20,000 of them have been hired within the last 12 months or added into the organization in the last 12 months through either hiring or through acquisitive activity. Same thing here with Twilio. When I started, we had about 1,200 people. Again, we're going to end the year at about 3,000 people. I mean, growth, wow. When you think about these digital firms, when you think about these more technology-based firms, growth is such a driving factor in a way that I haven't experienced in some of the more, in the McKessons of the world, for example.
And that's what digital leaders enable. And so let's get into the topic. Now, I want to provide a little bit of insight into how did we get to investigating digital leadership. And so a little bit of background about human capital growth. It is our great pleasure to be hosting this webinar with Andrew Wilhelms at Twilio. As a company, we focus on two main areas. We distill the science to help companies make better talent management decisions in terms of their systems and practices, and do better leadership development. So we do a lot of assessment work, assessing leaders for future roles, assessing candidates for fit with a big job, as well as development of those leaders. Now, 3 years ago, our clients were asking us for helping find, meaning help us identify digital leaders through the assessment work that we do. We can see some of the clients that we work with, they're around the world. A lot of them are brick and mortar companies that have to rapidly transform. So when we started to ask them, who are these digital leaders? What do you know about digital leaders that we should look for? And the answer was often just silence. They knew they needed digital leaders, but it was something that they couldn't really define. So we did a study combining really 3 sets of data. The first was looking at what do, the hundreds of scientific studies that are looking at what good leadership looks like, what do they have to say? Because our question was, how is digital leadership different than regular leadership? The second thing we did is we looked through our own archival data of all the assessments that we had done, particularly of digital leaders, and looked at how are they different in terms of their personality, in terms of their traits and attributes. So we brought that data to bear. And the third part was we actually did interviews with digital leaders in companies like Tesla, like Amazon, like Cisco, as well as many of the brick and mortar firms trying to digitize, like General Mills, also Cognizant, and many others. So we had this rich interview data, which is all, you will get to see that. Now, again, just as a reminder, we do have a webinar recording from the past, where if you're interested in the results of that study, feel free to actually look at your chat window right now. You'll see a link to that webinar. To present a context, several CEO reports show that companies are struggling to transform digitally, but the ones who are leading the digital game are 26% more profitable than their industry competitors. That is a significant lead that companies can gain if they go the route of digitizing. However, the challenge is that 70% of the leaders are reported as lacking the skills to transform their organization digitally. And this data comes from MIT. It has also been, the findings are very similar in a PwC study that was done last year. So it is an absolute imperative for companies to figure this out. And as one of our public service works, we're bringing this webinar, bringing experts like Andrew to help share insights on what you can do. So in terms of our webinar, we'll cover 4 key areas. What is the job of a digital leader? How is it different than a traditional leadership job? What are the unique traits and abilities that make digital leaders successful? Then we'll talk about the leadership competencies and how it shows up for digital leaders relative to other leaders. And we'll talk about the approaches, various approaches to growing talent that is responsible for your digital transformation. So those are the 4 areas that we will cover today. If you have questions, and by the way, we will have plenty of time in the end, at least 15 minutes to take your questions. Andrew is here to answer them. And thank you for your generosity with your time. So let's just get into the job of digital leaders. Now, here is this slide shows the findings of our study. In what way do digital leaders create value? And what we learned over here, Andrew, was that digital leadership is not just about IT. It's not about software. In fact, when we asked our clients, is that what you mean by digital leadership? I said, no, we're absolutely certain it's not just about knowledge of software and IT. What stood out for us was the statement that digital leaders take traditional businesses and do it differently.
What this one brings to mind for me is, so when I was joining Tesla, I was doing my interview process, and I was hired in by just a phenomenal leader, this man named Ben Putterman. So for those of you that might know Ben, in the interview process, what Ben said to me is, he said at the company he had come from, a well-known company, he had run learning and development in a couple of the businesses there. And he said, one of the things that I stood up at this company was the innovation lab. It was a lab for this company dedicated to driving innovative ideas. And he said, I will never work at a company again that needs a lab for innovation.
Interesting. Huh.
The whole company needs to be the innovation lab. And it was such a paradigm shift for me from where I was coming from, where it was this, yes, of course. And when I got into the ethos of the Tesla as compared to the other places that I'd worked that were a bit more conventional, it was, oh no, everything here is about finding these fundamentally different ways to do things, challenging things all the way down to the base assumptions. Elon would talk about this as this first principles thinking. He's talked about this publicly, so you might have seen these videos, but this sense of if the way you're finding a solution is going out there and finding the way we've done it in the past or the way others have done it in the past, and that's your starting place, you're never going to truly innovate. You have to get down to the base first principles. It's a physics concept, and then work up from there. And I just watched that challenge hit every single function in Tesla in a way that I had never seen in another company, where it was whether you're running finance, whether you're in this service center running this key kind of little process step, you're constantly challenging what's the better, what's the different, what's the fundamentally different way to do this. I mean, it's just in the DNA of the place. It's fascinating.
What kind of, so that's interesting, right? What do we do today? What do most large companies do? They see what the competitor's doing. And they're either copying the competitor or they're copying a competitor in a slightly different industry. And you're saying that's not what digital firms do.
Not primarily. I don't think that that's the starting place. Again, we'll benchmark and we'll look around and you'll see, I mean, the best digital leaders that I've worked with are incredibly curious and paying attention and constantly looking for that. What are they doing? What are they trying to, but they're not taking it to copy it. They're taking it to get to the kernel of why is that a good idea? Why is that practice there? And then extracting out of it some of the, again, first principles, base principles that then, then what's the innovation? What's the difference?
Yeah.
What this does lead to, and this is where my prior organizations would have been more uncomfortable with it, is you gotta be willing to test and learn. You gotta be willing to be wrong productively. How do you be wrong productively? And it's this way of planning, it's this way of allocating resources, it's this way of unlocking autonomy throughout the organization in a way that's really uncomfortable for those of us that grew up in a different time, maybe, to say it.
And we'll talk about that because there are some fascinating things that you've shared about Tesla that I don't think I've heard of any other company do it that way. So when we talk about the structure, we'll get to that. The point that I also want to highlight here, and Andrew, you've actually called out this piece, that digital leaders don't just do things better, faster, cheaper. They are disrupting their business, others' business model. They're creating value in ways that it takes away value from another. traditional firm. You want to comment on that?
It's the heart of it. If the heart of your business model is not some element of disruption, then it's you're going to be running the operational excellence game. You're just going to be trying to chase that productivity curve. And so it's that where you see a Twilio emerge in a marketplace, where you see a Salesforce emerge in a market, where it is not in these, oh, that's an incrementally better mousetrap. It is in a fundamental shift that is so much better, so much cheaper. So like it completely changes the way people work or do things. And to get to that solution, to get to that sort of innovation, I think Tesla, I think, is another good example of this. When Elon would talk about either the Model S as compared to its peers before, or when you look at the Gigafactory as a way of building cars as compared to other manufacturing settings for building cars, it can't just be faster, better, cheaper. It has to be exponentially better. It has to be disruptively better. It has to not just play the game better, it has to change the game. Does that make sense?
It has to change the game. That's the key word here. We're going to talk about that, disruptive business models that change the game. So the other question that we asked our clients was, actually, we did this analysis. We looked at how have job descriptions changed over the years. So if you look at the job demands and you do a comparison of the two, what we used to hear from our clients is, we need someone who can do that faster, better, cheaper. That's where the execution excellence came in. That's where the quality assurance part came in. And what we are seeing now is not that those are not important. They're lower in terms of significance compared to things like working on the user experience, being customer centric and deriving new solutions based on your understanding of the customer, innovation, working with an ecosystem rather than trying to do everything in-house within your company. It's just a different way of thinking about how to do business. And those shifts we're starting to see in the job descriptions, a good place for all of you companies who are trying to digitize is to say, what are we asking our people to do? Any comments on just the job demand part?
I think the one question I would guide kind of the crowd joining us today on this, or any practitioner in a talent management or a leadership development seat, or any executive team on this, is there's the question, what's the work of leadership? And that's somewhat what we've been wrestling with. But the other question is, who do we need in our company or in our organization doing that work? And I think that's the other place that I have seen this shift. So these are the jobs of leadership, quote unquote, on the left and on the right. But I think, and I totally agree with this shift, and it feels not like a shift from and to, it feels like a this now plus this. So it feels like an addition, at least from my experience. And the other place that it's not just at the top. Because even now I have to put quotes around the use of the word top, because we don't need leadership that seeing the better, the different, the new, and then rallying people to make that better, that different, that new happen. We don't just need that happening at the top of some organization. We need that happening throughout a place like Twilio, throughout a place like Tesla. And so not the type of leadership has shifted, yes, but also the amount of leadership and the sources of that leadership in an organization has been rapidly changing. And so you got to think about all of that.
I want to actually bring up something you've shared in the past. In traditional firms, leadership is appointed, it's ascribed. You get power with your leadership. And you shared with me that that's different in digital firms.
I think it's different in conventional firms now. And I think it's been rapidly, I felt this difference at McKesson fundamentally, and I've just been feeling it grow and evolve and change. My shorthand for this one, and again, a lay person, not an expert like you, but as I've played in this space, when I hear people asking for leadership, we need leadership, or this is leadership, whatever it is, there tends to be one of three things that they're describing. It's either who's setting that vision, who's setting some picture of where we could go, what we could do, that North Star. So think of the visioning work when we say leadership. The other thing that they might mean by it, or in my experience, what is meant by it, is that what's the motive power? What's that thing that causes an organization to go from where it is to where it could and should be? And so that paint the picture, but then build that momentum, that energy to get there. And I think that's really the heart of leadership. But there's this third thing that people mean when they use the term leader. Like, who's the leader, or where's the leadership? And what they mean by that in this third situation is who's in charge? Who's got the authority?
Right.
I think we used to be able to get away with calling all of that leadership. And it usually was whoever was in the position of authority in the structure was also the one that was setting the vision and then kind of calling the orders, generating the momentum, getting the compliance to take the place from where it was to where it needed to be. I think that that's never been perfectly true, and it is increasingly false and actually hazardous. Authority cannot be the way that vision is created and that momentum is generated. Increasingly, it actually gets in the way of it, because where you need the visioning and the rallying and moving of things has to happen from throughout the organization. And then what's happened is that those in an organizational structure that have authority, they can either use that authority to unlock that leadership throughout the organization, that creating visions and moving people towards those visions, or they can use that authority in a way that tampers it, that shuts it down, that discourages it. And a lot of the conventional ways of using your authority to lead, I think, actually shuts down the leadership many companies need, as opposed to unlocking the leadership companies need.
We heard examples of those, by the way. Large firms, very large technology firms that are trying to digitize. This is the number one thing they get wrong. They still lead innovation using the stage gating process, their budget, having budgetary allocations, which actually serves as a damper on letting innovation flourish. So a lot to talk about over there. I do want to get to the leadership requirements of how do you fulfill these job demands? Again, in the past, what we would hear is we need leaders who can hold others accountable, who are delegating work to a lowest level person in the company. Professional services probably still works that way. What we are hearing from digital jobs is that these leaders really need to roll up their sleeves and work with their teams. In fact, we hear this a lot, even in R&D teams, because insights could come from anywhere. Your idea about who owns the vision, who has the authority, all of that is sort of getting merged. The vision could come from anywhere in the organization. A leader's job is not to delegate, but to spot it. So this idea of being entrepreneurial and being able to manage conflicts between multiple ideas and demands, that skill has become elevated.
When we think about planning here at Twilio, for example, one of my favorite shifts is the heart of our planning process is the debate that it generates. And we'll talk about, when I'm teaching what we call our BPM process to either new Twilions or to rising managers.
Now, what is BPM?
Our big picture, priorities, and measures. It's our way of saying, what are our priorities? What's the stuff we should be working on? It's that kind of coming up with our focus areas as a company.
Okay.
And then you plan out from there. But that kind of heart of the organizational planning, for us, we call it BPM. And the heart of BPM is debate and conflict and everyone's best thinking getting on the table and then being processed. Our executives here will talk all the time about 80 to 90% of the value of this is not the output, it's the discussions we have in getting to the here are our priorities. And it's just been such a, oh yes, exactly. It's this conflict isn't a bad thing. Conflict is so exactly what you want. It's really uncomfortable. It's really hard. We wrestle with the agility and the adaptability. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier. I look at these lists, and these are not an or, it's not a from to, it's a plus. Because we still have to plan and manage. We still have to drive accountability.
Yeah.
There's still delegating throughout. And we talk about this all the time. But it has to be in ways that are agile. It has to be in ways that foster productive conflict and then manage it. Not shut it down, actually bring that conflict up and then harness it. It's
And
all
that's the
about talent
conflict.
management. Oh yeah, it's the and of these two lists that I think is really, really tricky for people making that shift towards fully unlocking what digital can be for the organizations of today that are. And again, when I hear digital leadership, what I'm hearing there is it's that people that are harnessing the latest in technology for the way their company can and should evolve to add value. It's beyond just the zeros and one, the software, the code. It's about, are we a place that is innovating our space, or are we a place that is just kind of stewarding our space, if that's accurate.
Creating value in the marketplace. Ultimately, it's about creating value in the marketplace that gives you an exponential competitive power.
But all of those on the right, yeah.
So let's talk about the unique traits, and we've touched upon a lot of this. And here again, this list comes from hundreds of studies that look at what do great leaders have in common? And that's all of the things under general leadership, high intellectual ability, high energy, tolerance for stress, all of those things. What we heard about from digital leaders, and more importantly, when we did the personality assessments and all the other assessments of their motives, of their interests, the things that stood out for us are these leaders are highly curious. In fact, a lot of them that we interviewed went even from the technology space. They came from business, they came from the social sciences, but they had this vision, they had a curiosity about the world, and they had a vision of what's possible. And some of that came from empathizing with their customers. So what is your reaction to this list?
It's resonating really strongly for me. The ones that I underline as I look through the list, I mean, curious, I've already talked about. The courageous is so real, because it's this. I remember I watched a talk by Marcus Buckingham years ago, and he talked about the work of leadership is in the future, and the future's uncertain, and humans are naturally anxious about the unknown. We just say it's one of those common fears that sociologists have found that actually spans all tribes, all civilizations. It's where that fear of the unknown is a human thing. And man, that's the work of, it always has been the work of leadership, you could argue, but it is the heart of the work of leadership on this right column. And to have that courage to move, to take the step into that unknown and to help others do that, huge. The ambiguity, that's what you're moving through. That's the playing field. And then that resiliency, because again, you're going to be wrong. Every step you take, it's like, it is into the unknown. It's we talk here at Twilio about draw the owl. It's one of my favorite of our values. For those of you that haven't seen the owl, the meme, there was a meme online years ago, and it just caught like fire through this place. It was this kind of picture. You have these two pictures, one on the left that says, how to draw an owl across the top. Step one, draw two circles. You see these two circles. Step two, and you see this beautifully fully drawn owl. It says, draw the effing owl, right? Just like, there's no playbook. Like, draw the owl. I can't give you step-by-step instructions for what's going to happen next. Get into it. Dive into the ambiguity. Take steps. Experiment. Be curious and learn, but courageous. I think the one that I would add to the list is that humility.
Humility?
I think it's the heart of being resilient. There's a toughness to resiliency, but when I think about true sustainable resiliency and the leaders that I've worked with here in the past that are really playing this space well, it's not a toughness-based resiliency. It's a humility and a learner-based resiliency. It's that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talked about. It's if your resiliency is based in your pride, not your confidence as a learner, then it's not going to last. It'll be it'll break under the pressure. But if your resiliency is based on a humility and a confidence that you can learn, that you can grow, and that you can bring others with you in that journey, it's incredibly powerful.
You know, the words that you picked out here, courageous, deal with ambiguity, resilient, risk taker, Elon Musk is kind of all over this place. And I know you work closely with Elon Musk, and what are your thoughts about how he does it?
Yeah, I don't know, like, and I don't want to mischaracterize it. I wouldn't say closely. I think we had but I've come to have an incredible amount of respect for his leadership. And I get that there are some other items on the list that you could kind of underline and be like, I wonder, and probably rightly so. The difference makers for me is the courage, the curiosity. Like, I mean, and that he doesn't just deal with ambiguity; he creates the ambiguity.
In what way?
He sees, or again, in my experience, humbly, from what I've seen, he pushes the thinking of the team, of the organization, of the whole space around him towards okay, you guys are incrementally thinking forward from here. What are what's the current state of the fleet of cars in the world? What's the current way we're producing and storing energy? What's and then you're incrementally thinking, don't do that. Think about where we want and need to be based on where if we don't get here by X date, this is what happens. And he starts there. And then he pulls the thinking backwards in a way that creates all of this sense of, oh shit, we don't know. Or I don't, and it creates this it pulls all of this energy towards where we need to go, as opposed to the step we need to take next. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's something to what he does in creating the pull for the place that I've just never seen anywhere else. And he's done it to 5 different industries through Tesla alone, let alone all the other places. It creates a magnetic pull for organizational inertia, momentum, energy, resourcing to go down. I couldn't describe exactly how he does it, other than, a degree of genius, but that courage piece.
I don't know that we have another Elon Musk in this world, but I'm so glad that we do have one, and hope he stays away from Twitter. All right, let's go through the competencies really quickly. We'll try to, just pick 1 or 2 to talk about what really stands out in your experience. Now, just as a framework, an evidence-based leadership framework shows that great leaders do 4 things. They strategize, they enable their people, enable and mobilize their people, enable change, as well as lead to operational excellence, meaning deliver on the promise. How do they do that? Those are all within the boxes here. And again, if you listen to the previous webinar, you'll get kind of all of the details behind. What you see on the left-hand side are the themes that we heard during the interviews about what is different about the strategic focus of digital leaders. And what I want to underline over here are 2 things. One is they definitely lean on exponential technologies. Think about all of machine learning and AI and robotics and all of those wonderful things to create exponential growth. But also they make good bets. And I would say the hardest part of digital leadership is probably making good bets and taking risks.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
I don't disagree that those are the hardest parts, but they're the hardest parts because they're the most out of your control in a certain sense.
Out of your control.
And so the one on this list that I look at that you can control is the last one. if you are a leader, or if you're coaching folks that are trying to lead in a digital way, or this digital leadership, underline that last one. That's where I would go. Like, walk in your customer's shoes. Know who you're trying to do something for or do something with, and then just get in the work with them, get in the trenches with them, know what their needs are, be in what they're trying to do, what matters to them, like up to your eyeballs, if not past. And that will unlock that judgment around what bets are good, what bets are bad. And it will give you that confidence around what risks to take, what risks not to take. It's, if you're shooting straight for one or two without the grounding of the fourth item, that's when you're going to be off. And I would probably add the third item as another enabler of good 1 and 2. And that's that study and know what is emerging, what are the latest and the greatest. But that curiosity, obsession with your customer, whoever that might be, whoever that could be. And then that learning, curious, humble, just fervent study of what's happening, what's emerging, what could be, what should be, what could be, what should be. And then using that as a way of building your judgment platform to be making good bets, to be taking good risks. That's the way I've seen those all play together.
Can I challenge you on that, though?
Please, of course.
If you look at Tesla, no one said they wanted electric cars, or did we? No one said we should get off of, carbon fuel.
I would. So I think it's an interesting challenge. What I would say in terms of, and this is off the cuff, right? But I think the thing about Tesla to be thoughtful about as a benchmarking person, or as another leader, Tesla is mission driven in a way unlike any other place I've ever worked. Like, Tesla is set out to fundamentally change the way we consume energy and transportation, and then ultimately to the way we produce and store energy, and get us towards an electric system faster. We had to. It was a sense of, we have got to get there sooner. And Tesla set out with that mission, and it makes almost every decision I was ever a part of or I ever heard about there, based with that at the center as the target. That's what they're solving for.
It's very mission.
Move the world, accelerate the world's progress to sustainable energy. And that mission centricity, it makes it a unique, fascinating, powerful place. I think if you are working for an organization that has that same centricity, that same sense of mission, then I agree with you, right? Be focused on that mission. But what I would say is that the Tesla team as a whole was very focused on, okay, so what do drivers care about? What do drivers want? How would we actually give them something, an alternative? And that sense of knowing who your stakeholders were around that mission was still very much a point of obsession. I think when I kind of extrapolate that Tesla lesson out to other organizations, there's two things I take from that. Number one, the more you can create a real sense of mission for a place, it is so effective, it's so powerful, it's so important these days. How do we do that? What is our mission, and how would we call people towards a more real, central, like energizing place around that? But the other thing I pull is that sense of, the mission for Atwilia, for example, is our customers, and is empowering our customers to do things with communication and apps that interact with communication technology that is game changing.
So solving their problems.
Solving their problems is our mission.
Yeah.
And that's the relationship between the two. Does that make sense?
Right. And so it depends on the leader, right?
I think it depends on the leader and the organization.
So I'm going to move you along, let's do this quickly. Let's just pick one of them. Speed and agility as the hallmark of operations, as opposed to just planning and tracking. I know you talked about speed and agility as being the key for digital leaders. How does that show up in real life? Because they're in opposing ends of planning, right? Long-term planning, knowing what you're going to do, kind of knowing of working in a very stable future.
Yeah. So I think there's the experimentation, fail fast, fail early. That's the one that feels the most real for me here, and the different between a Twilio and a Mixon in my experience. The lean operations, doing more with less, I think you're going to hear that everywhere. I don't think that's unique. I think every company is kind of wrestling with that. Navigating organizational structures, moving and tweaking your structures to unlock speed and agility is also right, but I think everyone's kind of moving towards there. What truly feels different in a Twilio versus a McKesson, again, from my experience, and I know McKesson has been doing a lot to shift this as well and move the needle on this, but it's that what happens when you're wrong? What are the consequences of being wrong? Or what are the consequences of something failing, quote unquote? And I think even the use of the word fail fast, fail early. If we were in science, and you run an experiment and you end up with a negative result from that experience, you don't call it a failure.
Yeah, you learn something from that.
It's a negative response. It's still a success. We ran the test, we got the result. The result was negative or positive. It's not about fail or success. It's about we learned. And did we learn what we were trying to learn? And I think that's the big difference is, are we shaping our plans to be goals, or are we shaping our plans to be experiments in pursuit of priorities where it's unclear exactly what's going to fully unlock the achievement of that priority? Does that make sense?
So you kind of, it goes back to, one is a clear path, other is knowing where you want to go and sort of charting your path and finding the path of least resistance. And that's something else you've talked about.
It's really, really hard. And the other piece to that one is then the cadence of planning and checking in, and then planning and checking in gets much, much more rapid. Annual planning, I think, is absolutely disconnected from the real world. And there's this, you still need to put things into an annual picture, but then how do you refresh it? In Twilio, it's interesting because we'll, of course, run an annual budget, like any company you would imagine. And then you got to put an annual plan against that budget. But then we have these quarterly check-ins, if not more frequently for other teams, where you're really running on that agile. Tesla was a whole different, this probably isn't true anymore. But when I joined, I had this conversation with the head of HR that sounded like, okay, so build a leadership development function. Got it. What's the budget that I can be working with? And she's like, oh, no budget. And I was like, oh, so I don't know resources. I can't, that's, and she's like, oh, no, we can spend money. There's just no budget. And I was like, I don't, and she's like, Andrew, I don't have a budget. There's no budgets. There's just.
You have to, so you have to justify why.
I was like, I don't, what does that mean?
Right.
Even to this day, it was such a shift for me from well, then how do I make decisions? Like, how do I know how does this work?
Yeah.
And she was like, let's go. We'll learn it together. And it was, it was such an extreme example of challenge every base assumption. And I'm not advocating here that no budgets is the way to go.
Have a budget.
I am just saying, like, that willingness to really challenge every orthodoxy about the way we plan and resource and focus as an organization. We have got to get into the DNA of how we've done this stuff over the last 20 years and fundamentally reinvent it. I mean, one of my favorite things written over the last 20 years is Gary Hamel, Management 2.0. And it's this, how do you hack management? And he just acknowledges right at the beginning of that work that we invented management. The way we manage and structure our companies is an invention. It's a technology. And a lot of that technology is out of date, and we haven't updated it. We haven't upgraded it. It's time to make the shift. I think that's that kind of management hacking, that what are the management structures, the resource, you got to get into that work to really start to unlock this stuff fully.
So let's do a couple more, and then I'd like to take questions before we get to the final part. Change. How do digital leaders lead change? And this in the past, it was through exercising business acumen, understanding kind of what's coming down the pike, what's happening in the industry. But digital leaders are actually at the forefront of change. They are changing the entire industry. And one of the things that we heard is that it's sort of not looking within your functional area, but it's sort of everything is up for innovation, for disruption.
Yeah, it's so as I hold this one and compare what I would have thought about it 7 years ago to what I think about it now, I think what I would have described leading change or change management as one of the things that you need to do as a leader. There's that, okay, this feels like a change leadership thing. Here's the playbook, run the playbook. Increasingly, it feels like, nope, it's not that. It is there. It's that sometimes. So I don't want to be too extreme about it. Yes, there's still a truth to that, but there's this more fundamental thing happening where change isn't this thing that every once in a while pops up that you need to do well. It's just the thing we're doing constantly. It's just what it is. We are in a constant state of change, and so therefore it's less about managing the change. It's more about creating the space where that change is productive. It's kind of, I guess you'd call it a little bit of managed chaos a certain sense.
I like the word managed chaos.
But it's messy.
Being comfortable with messiness, is that what you're referring to?
I think it's comfortable with messiness, but you can't be so comfortable that you're not doing something about it. So you still got to have that sense of clean it up or find a pivot, but it is perpetual. It is constant. It's not this thing where we just need to get through the next 3 months or the next 6 months, or if we just get around the curve of the next. This is what we do. What we do is come into the change that's needed and just keep working it. Come into the change that could be and keep working it. And we invite others to come into it, and we somehow build relationships with those others and help those others build relationships with each other through the structures we put in place, the incentives, the relationship, whatever it is. We invite people into the space of changing things for the better.
Yeah.
And you help them play productively in it. And so there's that, how do you make that space of change attractive and operational and fun and learning? And there's just a whole different way of leading when you're managing change as this thing that comes up every once in a while versus leading others through kind of changing things. Like, again, it's pretty philosophical and esoteric.
But you know what? Let me try an example because I can visualize what you're saying. I worked for a firm that was over 100 years old, and I was coming from a smaller tech company that was among the fastest growing on the East Coast. And the contrast between these two were fascinating. In this 100-year-old company, you built a PowerPoint deck and iterated it for 6 months.
Yeah.
You looked at every word, size 12 font, word for, you were iterating the deck, not even building anything. At the tech firm, you literally had 3 weeks to build something, slapping together sometimes just photocopied paper for people to learn what they need to learn, sort of pulling, nothing was perfect, but we had to just move really fast.
Yeah.
And the company was completely fine with that. And this other firm, everything had to be perfect.
From a leadership standpoint, as I'm hearing you describe it, there's almost this sense of, am I focused on helping people get comfortable with the change? And that's what old change management felt like. There's the change we're trying to make. How do we get people comfortable with that change, and how long will it take? Or are we trying to get people comfortable with change itself and changing? And that's the difference. If the stuff you're doing with your time is about helping people become comfortable with a specific change, there's no way you're likely moving fast enough. It's that, what are we doing as an organization or as a leader to help people become comfortable with change in general?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're after something. You're after something that will keep paying dividends.
So I'm going to do this one, and then we'll pause for questions because we're at 9:50, 10 minutes left. The final part is on people, and we've discussed this a lot, managing conflict, be a hands-on leader. Anything stand out to you as being different about digital leaders?
Again, it just goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is if you are in a position of authority in an organization, that is increasingly a dangerous thing, not a productive thing. And we've talked about this for years, the difference between influencing and authority to lead. I just want to underline it. I increasingly see people in positions of management at any altitude in a company, all of a sudden that authority becomes a detriment to their ability to lead in a way that is this leadership we've been describing today, as opposed to an enabler. And so learning how to both, and that said, we still need authority in organizational structures.
Someone has to make the decision.
There's still distributed authority, information rights, distributed decision rights, like all of it, there still needs to be authority in structures. Mm-hmm. But the way you hold that authority, the way you use it productively has been shifting, and is shifting so quickly. And therefore, the people that you look to put into those positions of authority, the way you train and orient people into holding those positions of authority has got to change with it. And you've got to be teaching people who are in positions of authority, not how to lead, but how to unlock leadership in the part of the organization that they are the steward of or accountable and responsible for. There's a bunch of stuff over the years that helps you do that. The servant leadership model, feedback is there's all kinds of things that are the ingredients for that we've been talking about for decades. But it's all coming together into a fundamental shift in the work of being in a position of authority. I would argue, and I think it's continuing to change.
I'd say 99% of the firms struggle with that. In our work, most companies, these are easy concepts to understand, extremely difficult to practice. So how about we take a few questions over here. There's a question, I'm going to take a few easy ones. Will the recording be shared? Yes, the recordings will be shared. We'll make the presentation available as well. There is an important question here. Let me go back and see what questions have been asked. I know there's a long one, and if you wish to see the questions with me, distinction between general leadership and digital leadership. Our comment, Victor says that what stands out for me is that you have skills under general, but it is conspicuously missing from the digital. And that's where the and piece, I think, comes in. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so what's your observation on the place of skill in the era of digital leadership? So, and the question uses the example of being able to code. Do you need to know how to code to be able to build a software company? And I think Steve Jobs is an interesting example of that, where I think he proves the no. But if you look inside Twilio, for example, the ability to code is at the heart of what gives our CEO the credibility and the insight into the marketplace. He started as a developer. So I think it matters less what's in your platform as a leader, as much as it matters how do you use what's in your platform, be it the skills, your experience, your insight, your vision, to connect with and build the team around you. To make the vision a reality. So I think in summary, if I was going to kind of sum up my stance on that question, I think it's less about your skill as the source of your leadership or the source of your credibility, and it's much more about your ability to create that common vision and bring people together around that common vision who have the right skills or could learn the right skills to make the difference. And I think it's because skills are changing so quickly.
Skills are changing. And, I brought up this slide to address the question about skills, because what we, to answer your question, Victor, what we see about digital firms is not all of them were founded by leaders who even had a college degree.
Yeah.
Not all of them were programmers. I mean, Amazon is a great example. Bezos was a hedge fund manager. He was in finance. Apple, Steve Jobs was more a marketing guy, didn't even have a college degree. Tesla is a different story. I mean, Elon Musk is very gifted academically. So what we find is that really it's that vision piece which is so hard to train. If you look at traditional firms, they all have college degrees, MBAs, but where you look for leaders in digital firms is maybe a very different place.
And I think it's a good news, bad news story. I mean, the good news is what's driving it is the democratization of the ability to learn or opportunities to learn. Like with the advent of the internet, with the prevalence of content pushed out from the internet to all available channels, the opportunity to learn something new, to build your skills is so available.
Yeah.
It's so there. And that's just what a great turn on the planet. But what this means is that the acquisition of skills, or even more, the possession of skills, is worth less today than it used to be because it's so available. It's commoditized, which is exactly what we want. But then if the acquisition or possession of a skill is less valuable, then what is valuable? And I think this is where you get to that ability to lead and the skill to bring people together and to keep people together and moving towards some productive change, as my definition of leadership. Oh man, that's more valuable today than it's ever been.
One of the leaders we talked to said, actually he's the former chief learning officer of Cognizant, and he makes this point that what has become more important today is problem finding.
Yeah, I think that's
more
right.
than problem solving, spending enough time to find the right problems you're going to solve is half the challenge of innovation. Yeah. More than half the challenge of innovation. And then you go learn what you need to learn to solve that problem.
And I think that's, again, specific to the frame we've given today, which is leadership. The work of leadership. If for those of you that are problem solvers, please be like, we love that. All of us have certain skills, certain knowledge that apply to certain problems others have, and that's exactly what we need. But the work of leadership is not problem solving. The work of leadership is increasingly problem finding and then problem framing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference maker.
Right. And when we had the slides up on the traits, metacognition was one of those the variables, one of those characteristics that was listed, and that's exactly it. Problem finding, problem framing, and then problems, enabling your team to problem solve. So we have just 3 more minutes left, Andrew, and I don't see too many other questions. Oh, actually, you know what? We have one more. Let's take another question. Would you please share your perspective on leadership behaviors towards an organization trying to make the leap from a legacy organization and move towards Industry 4.0? So, the Industrial Revolution 4.0, I guess, at a speed that is completely not used to.
Yeah. Vast amounts of tribal knowledge, norms. I think that quickly, given the time, again, we could spend a whole other hour on this topic, but for those of you that are in organizations trying to make the transformation, and what's the type of leadership needed to help the place make the transformation from more of the conventional ways of working to more of that kind of 4.0 future ways of working. The HR leader at McKesson, this man named George Figueredo, has just been a phenomenal mentor and teacher of mine. When we were he was leading a transformation at McKesson. He used the term constantly, and he would say it was this: be bold, but be pragmatic. Be bold, but be pragmatic. And I think that's my general steer on this question. It's that you remind your leaders, remind anyone in the organization that's coming out to the front of the change. We have got to be bold. We've got to stay the course. We've got to exercise that curiosity, that courage to keep the place moving, but we've got to be pragmatic about where people are, and that empathy piece and that relationship building piece that Shreya showed us in her former slide. All of those are ways of bringing people along. So there's that boldness in leading the change, and then that empathy and relationship savvy and attention that brings people along. And it's just going to constantly be a place of tension that you live in every step of the journey. Is that, are we moving forward fast enough? Are we bringing people along reliably enough or fully enough? Are we moving? Are we bringing? And so the more as you're in the midst of the change, you can give yourself indicators around pace and momentum in the organization, how much of the people we're bringing along, it's the sense to which you want to give yourselves those dials. So again, it's a huge question. We could spend a whole bunch more time, but that's kind of a high level thinking.
All right, we are at time. And just one final announcement, real quick announcement. We have a webinar coming up in August. Don't have the specific date. So anybody who is struggling with how do you create an optimal performance management system in your organization, linking pay to performance, or how do you manage the connection between the two, the person to talk to is Alan Colquitt. Until recently, he was heading the performance management practice at Eli Lilly, a very large pharmaceutical firm. He's done a ton of research, is an affiliate with the Center for Effective Organization at University of Southern California. I know that you have, that's your alma mater
yeah.
as well. Alan is absolutely amazing in this space, so please stay in touch. Feel free to reach out. We will send out invites to this webinar. So we don't have the date yet. I'm sorry. We'll get that pretty soon. But thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Feel free to send us comments. You will all receive a link to the recording as well as the slides. Have a wonderful day and night or afternoon wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.